Welcome to the bonus content. This will be a portfolio review and some paintovers discussions on the artwork of Gabriel Zanini. We'll start by hopping over to the website and taking a look at his art out there. Here is Gabriel's online gallery. It is at gzanini.artstation.com. Feel free to go take a look yourself. Or if you don't have an online gallery right now, you can make your own at ArtStation. It's completely free. I have one myself. We're going to flip through this artwork and take a look at it, but I have already copied these onto my hard drive and created some paintovers of a couple of them. And we will go through and take a look at those in just a minute. That is, if you can look at the big issues, good and bad, then they will trickle down to more pieces instead of trying to look at each piece individually and look at its strengths and weaknesses. So I will do that in Photoshop with the images that I've already pulled over there. So let's hop over there and discuss that. This is the first piece we're going to be looking at in the paintovers. I chose this image because the issues we're going to be looking at here basically apply to most of the other images. So it's really apply what you learn here to everything else instead of looking at every image. We're going to also be focusing our attention on a couple of issues and ignoring the rest, primarily looking at the handling of light and the controlling of values as well as surfacing, and ignoring things such as composition and character design. There's a lot to get through on these, and I'm trying to keep this fairly short, so let's just jump through. Right now, this is where he has the artwork. Where I'm going to be taking it with the paintover is this. Obviously, this is not a finished image. This is what I would consider a proof of direction, a way that you could take the image in order to address some of the issues that I think the piece is having to deal with right now. What he seems to be going for right now, to me, when I look at this, is trying to create a really strong sense of sunlight, a very positive scene, a colorful scene, but there are several things that is holding it back from achieving that goal, and I try to address them in this approach. To start with was the sky. I simply selected the sky area and repainted that with a nice blue tone. Don't underestimate how dark the blue can be in a blue sky. Also, starting with the bigger parts of the image and working down to the smaller ones, the sky is a big piece of the image. It is also a lot of the color that gets added, so we start there first. The next thing we jump over to are the wings, because they are also a large part of the image and will help sell the sunlight effect better. I think something to understand here is the idea of surfacing and ambient light. You see that because the wings appear to be getting darker, I think, than they should in this scenario. Now, we can see the areas that are getting direct light, and those are bright white. Completely agree. White feathers, nice bright sunlight, completely white. But there is also a lot of ambient light. For one, it's just really sunny. The other thing is there is still light bouncing around off of clouds, off of the atmosphere, and coming down and hitting the top of this wing, as well as there is light coming up. We're establishing the fact that there is clouds and cities all underneath her. That means those things are pushing light back up from reflecting them. So we have a white object in a bright scene, though not under direct light, but receiving a lot of bounce light. I just don't think it would have a tendency to go as dark as he is rendering it. So that is why I then add a lighten layer set to 71% and paint over it with a light blue. This helps really show how much extra light is in the scene. I then start with a normal layer and start painting in some changes to the wings. Again, I wasn't really saying character design, but I did want to touch on the note that as far as feather design, this probably is not quite as accurate as it could be. There might be a feather out there that looks exactly like this, and if it is, and you referenced it, I apologize. I simply think that most wings have a tendency to have a pattern of feathers that come off like that near the back. And then you usually have at least one more ridge that sort of does the same thing up here. And then you have the long ones coming off of those. I would suggest, incorporating those, which I did there. I just sort of blocked in that new pattern. Linear dodge the wings. I set up a linear dodge layer, used a orange tone, I think somewhere in that region, and glazed over part of it to add this nice glow. I put that even down here on the bottom side because having painted feathers and studied them a little bit, you understand that feathers are not opaque. That is, they are not solid. It's not like trying to shine a light through this little pin. They are transparent to a degree because they are so thin and light will filter through them. And I tried to mimic that effect by having that glow along some of the edges, and also it brings in a bit more color. Fabric, that is one of the changes here. We'll take a look at a video clip about how we put in those changes. I did make the adjustment to the head, made it about 10% bigger and lowered it slightly because the head seemed a bit small and the neck a little long, so I made that little change. We made change to the hair and the armor, and we will take a look at the clip about the armor. But as far as the head, the hair is jumping immediately to white. Again, that is kind of a surface issue where I don't think the hair would behave like that. If there was a light directly behind the head, the light shining through the hair would turn it white. That would be correct. But as it is, it's further away. It's more general light. And I think you would probably get something more like this. With the warm light, cool shadow dynamic that we're putting in, the hair on the shadow side would become a bit cooler. Flip that on and off. You can see how warm it is. And then I cool it down a little bit. I'll use that same cool tone and put it over other areas of that. And as far as the armor, we are looking at not only cool light in the shadows, but some surfacing qualities as well. Let's flip to the clip where I recorded that. Next, we need to address some of the color of the background. The clouds on the background are white, and they're basically going to take on the color of the light source because they have no color themselves. And right now they are very pink. Clouds, of course, can be this color, but the rest of the scene doesn't indicate that the light source has that much pinkness to it. It seems to be more in the peach, more yellow. So I make a color layer, put that over here, tint it towards that side in the light areas, and I put more blue and coolness in the shadow areas. I put that on and off, and you can see that changed. Next is the multiply shadow. The background areas weren't getting as much shadow as I think they should. They seem very, very light, so I just wanted to re-intensify those shadows a bit. That is sort of a judgment call. You can almost go either way on that, but I went ahead and put it in. And next is the norm refining. I went into the wings and added some light coming through the wings over here. I felt like those would be appropriate, or at least artistically interesting to do that. Went in and just did some cleaning up on the armor correcting some of these pieces. Again, just blue lights on the stuff facing up to the clouds, warm lights on the armor facing other pieces of the armor. Adjusted the hips a little bit and included some of the light there on the thigh. It was just a complete black, and even black tights are going to show some light. This is not a finished piece. I would not call this finished, but this is a proof of direction. And again, we're looking at just a couple of things. One is the surface quality. Is it reflective? Is it shiny? Or is it on the matte end? And two, warm light, cool shadows, and keeping that dynamic consistent throughout the image. All right, let's move on to the next image. Image 2 of 3. This one is mainly about perspective. I'm not doing a full paint over, but we want to bring up a couple of points. Let's see about identifying it in the scene and some of the options about going about trying to correct it. To start with, perspective on the character. I've already put in these little lines here, and this is a basic idea of the perspective on the character. I'm running a midline right through the character, and then one on the outside where the shoulders and the outsides of thighs would be. That's all pretty good. The character itself is fairly consistent. However, the perspective of the character does not match with the perspective of the scene, and that's really where we start running into an issue. Same thing with the next image. Each piece is fairly consistent to itself, but the pieces are not consistent with each other. This is an example of tunnel vision. We all do it to different degrees and to different things. If you don't get out of it, it will start making a blind spot in your art where you'll keep making certain mistakes, and you'll just be so used to doing it that way, you won't hardly be able to see them going forwards. This is the perspective here. Now, why does that not work with the rest of the scene? It doesn't work because this has a really big drop off. It's wide here and super narrow here. Like I said, which is fine if the whole scene has that. But this shows a large amount of distortion. It's going from very big to very small very quickly. The character's like, 5 or 6 feet. However, on the background, it doesn't. On this building, it goes from wider at the top to barely narrower at the bottom. So the background is not diminishing the same rate that the character is. Now, they can use different vanishing points, but they have to diminish at the same rate for them to exist in the same scene. This is a guideline of where the castle is right now. I just ran some lines, and you can see how that all matches up. This is how the perspective on the building should be if it was to match to the same consistency of diminish as the character. And in order to even get close to that, you would have to distort the building something like this. I just copied it and distorted it down. And you can see how the building goes from way big at the top to much smaller there at the bottom. It also brings into the issue of there's not enough depth perspective. That is, this should be more like that instead of them parallel. These are staying almost the exact same distance all the way across when it should be getting bigger as it comes towards us this way, and it should also be getting bigger as it comes towards us in a vertical manner as well. So this is a 3-point perspective. One perspective is going down here as it gets smaller. One perspective is coming this way as it goes like that. And one perspective is going that way as it goes to that horizon line. And I don't think he's bringing in all of the points that we would need to pull that off. Honestly, what the easier thing would do is to adjust the character. That would be something like this. So simply grab this, elongated it, made it bigger, and kind of slapped in a midsection. If you adjust that, now she fits into the vertical perspective of this scene much closer. That would be the quickest thing to fix, but you still, I would suggest addressing the issue in the background. Here, I will make some guidelines I don't already have in. This is a guide for that perspective, and this perspective, and this perspective. These are all parallel, but they shouldn't be parallel. Let me make some lines here, and I'll show you what I mean. I'll make some guidelines. And this is a way that you can make consistent perspective a little easier. I will go ahead and set that here, and I'm going to twist my perspective grid around. I will match up this side and say, let's say that side is correct. That will be my baseline. Now what I want to do is tilt that so we're having more of this dynamic as it goes off into the distance. And so that wall out there, eventually that's going to go like flat. That wall out there is going to be somewhere in that range. Now the rest of these need to flatten out as they go into the distance. That is good for this one. Let's go ahead and close it and open the next one. This is the third image, and the last one we'll take a look at. It has basically the same gamut of issues that the other ones have. That is perspective, like the second image, as well as surfacing and lighting of the first image. So as far as perspective, let's look at what he's already established and how there might be some issues there and how we would go about trying to correct those. Well, first is identifying where the horizon line is, because all perspective is going to be based on the horizon line, because the vanishing points are on the horizon line. The vanishing points tell you the angles that everything should be at. The horizon line, as indicated from the scene right now, is right there. Why is it right there? It's because of these bricks. These bricks already show perspective. They're diminishing into the background at a certain rate, and if you run them all back, they connect at this point. That means that's the horizon line. The horizon line is tilted to equal the tilt from the scene. Everything needs to be using that horizon line. Ish. You can do it that way, and that's the way I went with it. Go on, we'll look at the rest of these layers, where I try to adapt the scene to meet that horizon line. The other option is to adapt some of the other things to a new horizon line. I think perhaps it would actually serve the image better if the horizon line was put somewhere more in this region instead of that region. And I will show that if this is the new horizon line and I run this back here, I'll say that this one is my baseline, and then I run it to this point here, which is the crack. These do not diminish as quickly. And I think that might be better for this scene, but that's not what he indicated, so we go another direction. So we have the horizon line and we have the ground bricks. The scene confuses me a little bit. You've got a walkway here, fine, totally good with that. But we got a wall that seems to be going at this angle. If this is here, then that wall is going at a 90-degree to that angle, which is going back there or something like that. We're almost seeing this wall on its, more flat on, which means that it has to be turned to us quite a bit, like I show here. In my mind, I'm thinking that this wall should probably be parallel to the road. Like the wall thickness should be there and this wall should be like that, in which case we'd see very little of the edge of the wall. But maybe this city has things that are all askew and the wall goes at an angle. That's what we'll go with, because that's more of what has been indicated. But we do need to adjust for the perspective on the side. So these are the new angles that these stones need to be set in. So we'll put that in just a second, as well as the other side. Now here's a rule of thumb. We have our horizon line. Anything over this horizon line wants to come down to the vanishing point. Anything under this horizon line wants to come up to the vanishing point. But we have a mistake here where the wall is going up on the upside of the horizon line. We would then need to adjust it so it is following a pattern something like this. I eyeballed this, okay? Because the wall at that angle would put the vanishing point off of my monitor, and it was, I eyeballed it because it was so far out there. All right, it's almost flat, I'll tell you that. Other things to look at is this building is using a different vanishing point than this wall, which I would think those would probably be parallel, or this one and this one would be consistent. He's getting some of the perspective right. This is fairly accurate to itself if the rest of the scene matched it. This is accurate to itself, but the rest of the scene doesn't match it. And each piece by itself. Adjusting the wall. Here I've adjusted the wall, and I will put these up. And now you can see where the lines in the wall are matching up with my guidelines. Don't really pay attention so much to the lighting changes. We're mainly looking at the perspective changes there. Now, the mid-ground wall would be wanting to follow the same angle as this flat plane. It seems to me that this plane and this plane would both be parallel. Therefore, they would use the same perspective, and that is sort of what we get there. This is also the reason I think moving the horizon line up in the scene would probably be a little better, because this seems too distorted. But we're running for consistency here. Now we also want to look at something else. Let's pull these off and look at character heights. Ooh, boy. We can figure out how big these guys are in the background, or how big they should be, and that is what I came up with here. I'm going to run you through some of the thinking on that. This character has her heel right there. Now let's turn on the horizon line. We'll need that for a second. Now her going straight up is somewhere like that. Now she is crouched over, so I assume her full height would be somewhere in that region. And if that needs to match up with these guys. This guy's center is right about here. His cloak is coming out, but I assume his middle would be right about there. His head is right about here. Now I'm going to line up the feet so that the feet are running to the same point, and I'm looking right here where those two would match up. It's off my screen. And right there, I need to run a line to her head. That way, he and her could be the same height given the perspective. I'm using her to determine his height as well as his height. So his head needs to come up to there, and then his height needs to be brought down to about here. There we go. That's how we can determine how big or small things should be in this scene. We put those guys in, that would be more accurate to their size of the scene in relation to her. Perspective has sort of been completed. Most things are accurate to each other. Now let's take a look at the lighting. I'm going to take a look at the surfacing as well as the light consistency. There are three things that you want to get consistent with light: its direction, its intensity, and its color. Let's start by looking at the face. And this is an issue of lighting direction. She is mainly being lit by this lamp or torch or something right up here on the wall outside of our scene. And it's coming down this way with its little light beams. But this hood is wider than her face. So unless this light was around the scene more than 90 degrees to her side, there is no way that this light could get over to that side of her face. Now, there might be another light over here, but that's not really clear because it's also not indicated on the wall or anything else down here. So I assume this is the only light source. I also think that would be the best choice for this sort of assassin sneaking around feeling, is just to have the one light in here. So in order to keep things consistent as far as the direction, then we need to make sure this is all shadowed. We also need to look at other things. This shouldn't have bright light on it. This needs to have the same moonlight that everything else is getting. This would have a shadow cast from the edge of that. And this is actually pretty close. This, of course, is accurate because that is all in shadow, and we're just assuming that there is some ambient light bouncing on the rest of it from the rest of the room. That's where I start putting in some of these changes, starting with a multiply layer on the face. I'm just trying to come and match this shadow tone that he already has, put in a multiply layer, and then we'll start painting and cleaning that up. Now, cloak and the sky, I did patch that in. Now, the cloak, let's move back and start thinking about what we learned from the first image, which is painting fabric. Fabric is generally very matte. It resists being very bright from a highlight, and it resists going really black. This is a very muted object. So in this case, we see this becoming very light and dropping to almost black very quickly. Is it possible? Yes, but not given the lighting that he's giving us in this scene. Moonlight is very soft. We can, as artists, use some license and make it brighter and more colorful than it probably actually is, but it's not going to take a dark purple fabric and turn it into almost pure light. It's not that bright. So that needs to be toned down. On the other hand, we've got this torch. Torches will tint things towards their color, like you see the orange range here, but they, like the moonlight, are not that bright. All right, they give off light, but they don't have an intense light. This is almost like a spotlight amount of intensity, and that's the three things: direction, intensity, and color. The direction is actually really pretty good for this. The direction of the light coming, the way it would hit it, what it's hitting, and what it's shadowing, fine, good. The color is actually pretty good. He's incorporating the color change of the light, but the intensity is just ramped up way too much to mimic the way that it would work on the surface quality. So we are doing this. We're putting some of the blue tone from the light, showing that it is getting that cool light. We are letting it stay warmer in the light, but bringing down that value so you have more color. This was added throughout the rest of it a little bit, just lightening it up, not letting it go to pure black immediately, and cleaning up that edge on the face. Now you can see that the whole face is in shadow the way that it should be. I'm just using a blue photo filter. You can go up to Image, Adjust, and go to Photo Filter right there. Cooling off the skin in the shadow, cooling down this area in the shadow. Nothing too dramatic there. And the face overlay. The face was still a bit warm, so I wanted to tint that to the cool side. When I'm thinking of a scene like this and working through the lighting, looking through the direction, the color, and these sorts of things, it is not unlike the way that a computer would render a 3D scene. It starts with the wireframe, and then it connects all the polygons into a surface, and then it finds the light source, and then it traces where the lines from that light source would go. And we say, would that be lit? Would this be lit? Would this be lit? Would this be lit? Okay, it's going to hit this object. What is this object? What is the surface qualities of this object? Okay, let's calculate how much light would bounce off of this object. When I hit this object, is it going to pick up any of the color from this object? So it's going to now compute the fact that it picks this up and bounces it back up to the next object. And that approach can work with your artwork. That's the way it works for me. I approach it very logically, just stepping through, thinking about each thing. How would this behave? Like a human computer, just computing the elements in the scene and working it through in my head. On the arm, this is super rough. This is just a note of direction. The arm needs to go very cool. The white highlights of the fabric and the little shoulder piece have been toned down to have the blue light, and some more detail has been added to the face. I did go here because this is really the focal point of the image, and I'd like him to know kind of how to take this once he gets to the stage. So the moonlight can be casting a light on here, and it's not really getting bright. We're not going super bright with this. Like we still could go way up here. This is that bright, purple blue. But that's not what we need. This is still right there in the mid-range. And it's nice and soft. And you can see how that goes onto the skin there. Just little details. You could add some moonlight catching little pieces of the fabric right there along the edge. And this needs to be applied to the rest of the image. And really, I like this scene as a whole. The person hiding behind the wall, the warm light over here, her in the shadows, some sort of gothic city in the background, characters there waiting. She's going to be taking them out. It has a nice visual read. It has a nice narrative to it. But what we need to do is just really work on that consistency. To him, to Gabriel, you're doing good, man. Honestly, you are. I've been looking and talking about a lot of issues with the artwork, but seriously, you have already come so far and you are getting so many things right. Do not take that hard. What I'm talking about is just tweaks, man. 80% of the work's already done. You need to come in and do 20% of the tweaks to it, and you're going to have some really strong pieces. They have the right narrative. They have the right feeling. You have the right ideas in there, and now we just need to hone them. So keep doing your thing, man. Double down on, doing studies of perspective and surface qualities and lighting. I think those three things added into the skills that you have already practiced and got down, you're going to be just doing killer work. And, I'll be looking out for it in the future. You guys out there, one of the reasons I chose these images is because I see these things in so many galleries. So many of you guys submit your portfolios to me, and I see these exact same issues. So try now to go back to your own artwork and say, what am I doing that I saw in this video? How can I correct it by the things that he said? A wise man will learn from other people's mistakes. Make that effort and learn from it. I really appreciate you sticking with me through this extra bonus content. I hope you have enjoyed it. If you want to get future content, then please check out my Patreon. If you are not a patron already, patreon.com/swatches. Feel free to watch my free videos on YouTube, youtube.com/swatches. And I will see you out there. Until I see you next time, keep drawing.